and they can catch up with us. Welcome to Demystifying Grant Writing. I'm Jennifer Berthelot. I'm Communications Director for the Office of Tourism. I am happy to have you all here today for the next webinar in our series. If you're not aware, we are doing a webinar series that we are hosting every Tuesday at 11. We're covering a whole variety of topics. We've done email marketing, social media, storytelling. We're obviously here for grants today. We're going to be covering sports tourism in the future. We have a whole lineup for the next few months that you can find online on our industry portal at louisianatravel.com/industry. We have that under our free opportunities right at the top of the page. I'm also going to encourage you, if you're interested in some additional best practices and guidelines on marketing, to visit our Google Recovery Toolkit. It has a lot of tips and tricks for working with Google My Business, SEM, a whole variety of digital marketing topics. So that is also free, and all you have to do is log in with your Gmail account and our password, which is just Louisiana, and then you're in and you can access all of that content. So I encourage you to check that out too. We have also recorded all of our webinars from the previous presentations back in 2020, and you can access those on the portal as well if there was anything that you missed and want to catch up. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and welcome Sharon Calcote, our Byways Program Director and our grant writing guru here at Office Tourism, and she is going to take us through her presentation on demystifying grant writing.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, everybody, for joining me today for the Demystifying Grant Writing webinar. As Jennifer said, my name is Sharon Calcote, and I'm the Byways Director for the Office of Tourism. For some background information, I've been with the Office of Tourism for over 20 years, and I have done my share of grant writing. When I first started at the Office of Tourism, I headed up the Heritage and Rural Tourism Program, and it had no budget. So in order to conduct projects, I had to write grants to get funding for the things I wanted to do. And I wrote folk life grants, art grants, humanities grants, grants to the National Park Service, byway grants, and I wrote BP grants. And I've written grants for projects in Louisiana ranging from $20,000 to $6.5 million. And in all these years, I've had one project not funded. And I kind of don't feel like it was my fault, because I consulted with the group and I told them that they were asking for too much money for what they were doing. And I think they kind of outed themselves because of the amount of money they were looking for. But anyway, in addition to writing grants, I've been a grant reviewer. So I have reviewed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of grant applications. So I have a pretty good understanding of what grantors are looking for. And one of the first things they're looking for is that the applicant has an understanding of the types of things they fund. And there might be a lingo with individual grantors that you might need to try to understand. And you need to study what grantors have funded in the past. So it kind of might give you an idea of what they may or may not, what they may or may not fund. So Jennifer, can we roll? Okay. So a lot of people think grant writing is a mystery. People think it's difficult. I'll never be able to write a grant because it's so hard. I don't understand. It's really not difficult, and it's not overwhelming. The biggest thing about writing a grant is answering the questions. And this was a hard lesson for me when I wrote my first couple of grants. One of the first things they ask you is, what are you going to do with this grant? What's your grant going to do? And a lot of people, instead of answering the question in a very boring way that says, these funds will be used to and then you discuss your project, we talk about all the benefits. We say, oh, this grant's going to help an underserved population, and, we're going to, make everything green, and we're going to solve world peace, bring world peace. I mean, all of the things that we talk about the benefits and not actually what the project is going to do. So a lot of organizations want to take the easy way out, and they're just going to hire a grant writer, but not all grant writers are created equal either. And it's my belief that anyone can be a grant writer. We need to move. Okay, so when you are writing a grant, you need to have a specific project in mind. I know there is a desire to call up somebody, let's say with the Office of Tourism, and say, I want to write a grant. I want to have a project. So what do y'all fund? You never, ever, ever call a grantor and ask what they fund. What you might want to do is find a grant that you might be interested in, develop a project idea, and call them and say, this is my idea. Is this something that you think your organization might be interested in funding? And when you do your grant, there are two things that are the most critical part of a grant. One is having a detailed budget, and you need to show all of the expenses and income. But if you have anticipated income, let's say you also applied to the Kellogg Foundation for funding, so you put that in there, don't do that. If you absolutely have the funding and you have a letter in your file that says they are going to fund you, then you can put that in your revenue column. And you have to include all of your expenses, anticipated expenses. And sometimes they will and sometimes they won't fund administrative fees. And if they do, it's going to be on a very limited basis. They are not going to fund a whole salary necessarily if they don't fund salaries. And you have to find the right source. And finding the right source really isn't that difficult once you have your project in mind. And you have to review the eligibility and the requirements. Eligibility, you might not be eligible. It might only be for institutions of higher learning, or it might just be for county governments. And sometimes the grants are very expansive and they're open up to individuals, communities, counties is what we would be, parishes, or the whole state, or higher education. I mean, you have to see what's eligible. And then they will give you a little blurb in their announcement about the types of things that they will fund, but they also might talk about what they will not fund. And you need to pay attention to that really carefully. So you need to review all of the information that you're going to have to provide as well. And when you write a grant, you got to remember there's no free money. There are strings attached. There's a lot of reporting. There's documentation. And I have a federal grant right now, and I have to do quarterly reports. And they have a form that you have to fill out, but you have to be able to break it down into what is state money or what would be individual money versus the amount of federal dollars that you're using every time that you're doing this quarterly reporting. The other thing about grants is there may be a cash match. And that cash match can be dollar for dollar. It can be 20%. So you have to make sure that you have some allowed or allotted budget that you can spend towards the match. Some grants do allow in-kind match But you really have to be very careful about that because you're going to have to be able to prove and to document the in-kind match. So if you are matching equipment, you have to put a value on that equipment. If you are getting services provided for free, but it has something to do with the grant, you need to have a dollar value attached to that service, and you need to put it in a column so you are showing what the in-kind match value is. And when you are reporting, you are going to have to be able to validate that in-kind match and prove that, yes, indeed, it was worth that amount of money. And I honestly, in-kind match grants probably aren't rated as high as when you have at least some portion of it as cash. Okay, there are several sources of funding, and this is only a short list. I mean, it goes on and on, but there's federal dollars or federal programs, there's state programs, there's local programs, there are foundations, and there are also some nonprofits that offer funding to certain groups as well. But you have to remember that funding is going to be based upon the merit of the project. So you found a grant and now you're ready to fill it out. Well, unfortunately, it doesn't go that quickly. Sometimes there are registration requirements. To do business in Louisiana, you need to be registered as a vendor on la.gov. And to register in la.gov, you have to have a W-9 completed and signed, and it has to the same entity name and the same person signing the W-9 have to be registered into la.gov. And if you're a nonprofit, you need to have a board resolution saying that the person signing has the authority to do so. And you might also have to register with the Secretary of State's office. If you're a nonprofit, you have to be in good standing with the Secretary of State's office. And that means you need to register on the Secretary of State website, and you have to file an annual report. And then they will give you a letter of good standing that you can then submit with your state grant. So, like I said, to complete the W-9, the name of the entity has to be the same that you register on la.gov and the same name that's authorized to sign by the board resolution. Because if it's different, la.gov is going to kick it out. The board resolution is really a very simple letter, and it would be on letterhead, and it would just say that the Jane Doe, who is with our organization, has been authorized to sign agreements and contracts with the state of Louisiana. And it would have to be signed by either the secretary or the treasurer of the board. So it's a real simple document. It's not like a board resolution really needs to be passed as long as you have this document saying that the board has given this person authority to enter into contracts with the state of Louisiana. And if you have any questions about registering into la.gov, there is a vendor registration contact at the Office of State Procurement, and the number is right there. It's blocked for me, so I can't see it. Okay, in applying for tourism funds, there needs to be a completed W-9. There has to be the letter of good standing from the Secretary of State's office, and there has to be the board resolution designating the signature authority to enter into a contract with the Office of Tourism. To apply for federal funds, it's a little more complicated and it takes more time. So I would say anybody that's interested in the new federal byway funds that are going to be coming down the pike, I would start this process now and I would get registered in grants.gov right away, because that registration might take several weeks to complete, particularly in these days of COVID. But to apply for federal funds, first you need a DUNS number. And that is a Dun & Bradstreet number that you go to their website and you fill out information about your organization, the official name, the address, and your federal identification number, which would also be your employer number. And it takes a couple of days to receive your DUNS number, but you can't register any further in grants.gov until you have your DUNS number. If you already have a DUNS number, make sure that it's current. So you might need to go to the Dun & Bradstreet website and double check to make sure that it's current and up to date, because if it hasn't been used in a couple of years, it's probably been deactivated. Okay, while you're waiting for your DUNS number, your employer identification number, or your company's tax ID number, so you have EIN or TIN, and you will see those abbreviations on the grants.gov website. And you don't have to have both, you just need one or the other. But they are acronyms basically for the same number. You will also need your bank's routing number and your account number. And as government agencies will be paying you, you're going to have to register in SAM too, because that is the database that is going to issue checks or wire transfers to your bank account. So to register in SAM, you have to go to its website, which is listed there, the Federal Contractor Registry. And this will register a person as the administrator. Every entity, company, or person registered in SAM must have an entity administrator. And this is going to be the person that is going to be authorized to go in to make any updates into the account. And it's also going to be the person that will be responsible. You'll be getting the emails, you'll be getting the notifications from SAM. And they make it a little more complicated today because you have to send the federal government a notarized letter listing the person that's being named as the entity administrator. And there are templates that are available that they recommend that you use this, but you have to send it in as soon as possible because it takes a few days for them to receive it, and then it takes a few days for them to approve it. Then it takes a few days for them to send you notification that all of the numbers that you've entered, the names of your company, all match everything that you have put into the system so far. And today, the SAM's registration can take up to 5 weeks. And that's why I'm saying, if you're interested in the byway grants are probably going to be made available in the next 2 months. You need to go ahead and register on grants.gov, and you need to go ahead and do your SAM's registration because it could take a long time. And I will give you a tip. All of the information that you submit online, write it down so you have a copy of it. You have to have a copy of, you need to know what name you were doing, the passwords that you were putting in, because every time you want to check on the status of your grant or apply for a new grant, you're going to have all this information. So for every grant that I apply for, I have a manila folder and I write down all of this information. So I have it right there and it goes back to that particular grant that I've applied for. And everything needs to stay current. So you are going to be updating this information annually to stay current in the system. Next. Yeah. Okay. So you're finally registered in grants.gov. You're finally registered with SAM. So now let's talk about, how do you write the grant? How is it most effective? And how do you submit the grant if it is not electronic? Sometimes grantors want hard copies of grants. What they hate, absolutely hate, is when each page is put into a plastic sheet and put in a 3-ring binder. Don't do that, because they tear these grants apart and the budget might be reviewed by one section while the project description and the backup information is approved by another. So I know when I reviewed grants, a lot of people would submit the 3-ring binder. They would have those plastic sheets for each page, and I would take all of the pages out of those plastic sheets. I would throw those and the binder away, and I would just put a clip on them. And I know that doesn't sound sexy, but that's how they like to receive them. They don't want anything fancy. They want it to where it's going to be easy to review. The other thing about grant writing and grant reviewing, it is not a creative writing class. And really, grant writing, the way it's structured, is kind of boring because they just want the facts. They don't want flowery language. They want to have it crisp, concise. They want to know clearly what you are trying to do, what you're wanting to do, and what will the outcomes be. So the budget, like I'd mentioned before, that is very important. It has to make sense. If you were applying for a $20,000 grant, then you probably should have at least $20,000 or more of other income that you are going to be matching it with. They don't like to be the only funder. But if that is the case, that they are the only funder, cash match is better than in kind. If you do in kind, you have to be able to show how you're going to document it and prove that you have that in-kind match, and you have to have a value assessed to that in-kind match. And it has to be reasonable. The project description, like I had mentioned before, the project description is this funding will be used to do whatever it is that the project is going to do. And then they might have something about a community benefit. What is the benefit to the community? What audience are you serving? And it's not always a good idea to do it independently. You can have partners. You can have people that are writing letters of support. You can say that these other organizations are supporting this effort. The letters of support are very important. They want to show that there's been public input. Maybe there's been a couple of meetings and this is the project that has been decided upon, and this is how you're going to be moving forward. The transmittal letters, that's basically a cover sheet. And that is just saying who your organization is, what you're applying for, a brief description of the project, and just saying that all of the required information is attached. And the transmittal letter, when you list all the things that are attached, it's a checklist for you as well to make sure that you have submitted all of the information needed for that to apply for that grant. And the next thing to do is to do some follow-up. When, like the grants.gov, when you look at the page that has the grant announcement, there will be a contact name and a phone number at the bottom of the page. Make a note of that, and about 2 weeks after you have submitted your grant and the deadline has closed, follow up with that person and just say that you're calling, you had submitted a grant, and you just want to introduce yourself. Federal agencies like to hear from the people that are applying. Usually they will even help you walk through the process of what they're looking for and what they're not looking for, as long as you have an idea of what your project is. So you got to bring something to the table to talk to them about. And then they'll help you do it the right way, and they'll advise you that you might want to word it this way or that way. So the follow-up is as important as discussing it with them if you need to while you're writing your grant application. And also, sometimes, this is mostly true with state agencies, if you draft your grant early, the granting agency, and I'm thinking more like the Office of Cultural Development with the folk life and the arts, they'll review your grant and they will tell you what needs to be changed to make it more competitive. And you can have others read the grant to make sure it's clear what you're asking for and that your implementation process and your documenting and reporting on the outcome is right on target. I have quite a few people look at my grant copy before I submit it, because sometimes I get so close to my project, I can't see that there are gaps. But if other people have questions in their mind about what it is you're actually applying for, then you might need to go back to the table and you might need to rewrite your grant a little bit. Simpler is better too. Like I said, it's not a creative writing opportunity. The other thing about grants, the grant process might be different from your schedule of when you want to implement your project. They might be a year out. Sometimes it might, I'll give you an example. I recently applied for a grant to the National Park Service for their Civil Rights History Grant. And I applied for markers, for Civil Rights Trail markers, for them to help offset the cost of us fabricating these markers. And we launched the trail in January. They're not going to review these grants and make decisions until June. So we are paying for the first 4 markers, and we're hoping that we get this funding that the National Park Service will help pay for the remaining markers, but that won't happen until June or after. Because even after you receive a grant, you might have to go through an RFP process. You might have to find other ways of finding a contractor to do the work if you are not doing it yourself. So you might have to enter into a contract or an agreement. And those agreements, in some cases, need to be approved by the grantor to make sure that you are going to be doing what you say you're going to be doing. So all of this takes time. So when you are thinking about writing a grant, look at what you want to do and the timeline that you need to do it to make sure that they're matching up, because it really might take some time. And in the case of the Office of Tourism and some of the other state agencies, sometimes the grant payments come after the fact. So you might need a cash flow to carry you through the process of your project, and then you turn in the deliverables at the end, and then you get reimbursed. I have 3 byway grants right now, and that's how it works for us. We have to pay it out. We have to prove that we've paid it, and then we get reimbursed 80% of our cost. And you have to keep receipts. You have to know what the reporting requirements are, and you need to meet those deadlines, because if you don't, it could jeopardize not only that funding, because they can come back and take it back, or it could jeopardize future funding. So I know this has been really a brief overview, and it dealt mostly with how to register on grants.gov and louisiana.gov. But those are 2 of the most critical things you need to do in order to be a successful grant writer. So I encourage you to go ahead and register your entities as vendors on both those sites. So when you find grants that you were interested in, it's just a matter of inputting the information that's going to be required on the individual grant you're seeking. And I think I am also going to do another seminar later that would actually walk you through a grant application. So you will see that the questions are really very easy and straightforward. Give simple answers. Don't make it complicated. Make it clear and concise to where they know exactly what it is you're wanting to do and how their funding is going to be used. And they do like a return on their investment, even if it's just a successful project. If you have a news conference at the end, you can invite them to participate, which they may or may not do, but they may want their logo used. These are things that are all part of the bigger grant writing picture. But this was just an introduction to grant writing, and my email address and my telephone number is there. And I'm more than happy to give you any hints or more hints if you have a specific question. I am also very happy to help y'all through that process. So I want to say thank you for joining me today. And I hope that this has helped you learn a little bit about the grant writing process. Thanks.
Awesome. If there are any questions, feel free to post them in the chat or voice them. We're not so crowded. I don't think we can have a couple people speak if they have a couple of questions. And if you'd like a copy of the presentation for all those links and everything, feel free to reach out to either myself or Sharon for that too, and we can shoot that over to you guys so y'all have access to all of the hyperlinks for all of those registration processes. You're welcome. I'm not seeing any questions come through in the chat, so I'm going to go ahead and say we can wrap this up and everybody can go get some lunch and get on with their day. And feel free to reach out with any questions you guys have. Thanks for
coming.
coming.
Thanks.
Thanks.